Ailsa Campbell, and I'm here with Melissa Dunphy. We're going to have a little chat about the music that we sang in our Anna Lockwood concert a few months ago, which you can still view now. It's still available to watch. We'll put a link in the video description down below. So, Melissa, how are you today?
I am doing well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here chatting with you.
Oh, good. So you're based in Philadelphia at the minute. So a few hours behind us. What's life in Philadelphia like at the moment?
Life in Philadelphia is pretty hot and muggy. It's always, we're actually, you wouldn't believe this, but the east coast of the USA is actually considered subtropical in climate. So yeah, I know, I looked this up a couple of years ago because as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not a native Philadelphian. I'm originally from Australia. And I discovered that the summers in Brisbane, Australia, where I grew up, are about as hot and muggy as the summers in Philadelphia here in the USA. So it's hot and muggy.
Yeah, sadly we can't say the same about London, but not had a very good summer this year, which is a shame. Great. So when did you move from Australia to Philadelphia?
When I was in my early 20s, I fell in love with an American. Some people say I had the misfortune to fall in love with an American, but it actually worked out very well. We're having our 18th wedding anniversary in 2 weeks. So so I was 23 when we got married. On one of those really creepy 90-day fiance visas, which was the only way to live together. And it was actually only after I moved to America that I became a composer. I was already a musician, but I didn't catch the composition bug until I was in my mid-20s, which seems really late, but actually it's not.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always good to find what you really like doing later on in life, I think.
Yes.
So we sang two of your pieces in the concert. One was Halcyon Days, Halcyon, yeah?
Halcyon.
Great. And O Oriens. O Oriens was particularly one of my favourite pieces. It just felt like it had such an amazing structure to it, and it was kind of started with just the sopranos, and then really branched out, and it was probably one of the most climactic moments of the concert was in your piece, I think. And Halcyon Days was written for Watchers 8 as well, so that's really exciting for us to sing some of the music that they've done. So could you tell us a bit about those two pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with Halcyon Days. I'll go backwards chronologically. So last year, Watches 8 approached me and asked me if I'd like to write a piece for them, which, full disclosure, I have been circling that group for probably 5 years, basically without saying it so in as many words, begging them to let me write music for them. So last year when they tapped me, it was all I could do to contain my excitement. It was an interesting experience though, because they said I was writing for their holiday concert in December, and I was writing in the middle of August, around about this time of year. So it's very not the opposite of Christmassy, sort of in feel and weather. And also I'm sort of trying to write something that's comforting and holiday-y, but in the middle of probably the most frightening part of the pandemic last year. And I think Watchers 8 was very open to that, actually. They said, don't feel like you don't have to address what's going on in the world around you at this moment. So a friend of mine, Jackie Goldfinger, is a poet. And I'm actually working with her on an opera right now. She's my librettist. And I said, would you write something for me that sort of, I blurted out a bunch of emotions and feelings and said, something along these lines. And she came up with this poem, and I kind of went for it. And the point of it is, finding the moments of calm and comfort in a year which was dreadful for, a lot of us pretty much, all over the world. And it's very hard sometimes to find holiday spirit, if you want to call it that, in the middle of all of that mess. But I think that, those are the times when you really do have to reflect on the things that you have that are important and good. So that was that piece. And then, of course, the most daunting thing about writing for a group like Watches 8 is that in the back of your head, you sort of think, no matter what I write, they're going to sound amazing. Like I could really write something that's quite terrible and they would still make it sound amazing. So how do I even judge if it's a good piece or not? But I think the reception to it has been great. I know, the BBC singers have sung it and groups are picking it up all over the place. So hopefully that means that it is actually a decent piece that holds together on its own. And it's not just that What to Say is so amazing that they could make, I could set my laundry list and they would make it sound emotional and wonderful. So that's that one. Oh Orions is a little older, a few years old now. There's a group here in Philadelphia, Choral Arts Philadelphia, who approached me. They were doing a project about the O antiphons, which are a group of chants that are usually sung around Advent. And there are 7 of them. So they had picked 7 composers to each compose one of the O antiphons. And they sent out an email, first of all, that said, hey, composers, here are all 7 of you. Whoever wants dibs on one of the O antiphons, sing out and you can, reserve that one. So I very quickly looked at the texts of all of the O antiphons. I didn't really know them before I set this. And I immediately caught onto the O Orions text because I think it's a really universal text. And I think it's beautifully metaphoric. Like it is about Advent and the birth of Christ, if you like. It's also, because Advent of course is around the winter solstice, it's about the darkest time of year. And on a wider scale, actually, I was at that time recovering from an episode of depression, and I saw this parallel between talking about being at the darkest time and wanting the sun to come back. I saw this parallel between that and depression recovery, which is something that a lot of people can relate to, being in the darkest time of your life, and finally seeing the hope and the possibility that the sun is going to come back, and longing for that moment while also acknowledging the darkness that you're traveling through. So I immediately was like, that one's mine. I think I was the first one, the first composer to say, nobody else touched this one is mine. And really, I took inspiration from the chant melody itself, which you can trace throughout the piece, sort of hidden and buried in the counterpoint sometimes, and sometimes used in the surface on the theme. And it's done really well. It's one of those sort of, I tell people, when you write a piece of music, you don't necessarily know how it's going to do out in the world, whether people are going to, really react to it and connect with it, or whether it's sort of something that you connect to, but people connect to in a very different way, or not as much as you do. But this is one that I think a lot of people connected to, and so I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think as someone that was singing it for the first time, that I really did connect with it. I think also it's such an amazing text. I think even just the O is such an amazing, and the way you set that as well, because you repeat the O quite a lot, and it kind of builds intensity the more you say oh, and then
oh my gosh, my speech and drama teachers who coached me on how to read and perform Shakespeare would be so proud to hear you say that. It's like, it's all about that O, right? It's like, don't throw that away. The O is there for a reason. It means something. So yes.
Yeah, super expressive, and yeah, that's really excellent. Good. And so how did you start going about writing the piece? So you obviously connected with that text quite a lot, and then how do you go from there to the actual writing of the music?
For me, it's about text. I do that connection with the text, and then I try to find the melodies and the harmonies that mean something along with that text. I'm a big advocate of how musical language has very specific meanings, and it's different types of musical language. So in the world of, what do you want to call it, Western European choral music, there are certain sonorities and tonalities and harmonies that mean really specific emotions, really specific feelings of longing, or specific conflicts. And so it's a matter of sort of really thinking about how those two meanings can intersect. Um, you find a melody and you have to ask yourself all the time, what does this melody mean? Does it mean happiness? Does it mean sadness? Does it mean a specific place or time or feel? Like, what are you going for? And then how does that intersect with the text? Is it increasing the meaning of the text? Is it contrasting with the meaning of the text and sort of setting up a kind of juxtaposition? So that's sort of always where I start. And then it's a matter of a lot of, it's almost like solving a puzzle, but also sometimes a little bit like drudgery. Composing for choir can be a little bit like solving a cryptic crossword,
Yeah,
because
I know what you mean.
like, yeah, you find one thing that fits, and then you have to find everything that fits around it to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And if the first thing didn't fit right, then you have to scribble it out and try again. And but when you've solved the whole thing, it's such a great feeling. Like, you feel like you've really accomplished something. You feel very clever for about 5 minutes.
Like, it perfectly makes sense, doesn't it? And I think especially singing the music, it was very easy for us to read and sing the lines quite easily because of the way that you've written it. And I imagine that's part of the solving the puzzle, because you don't want suddenly like notes to just kind of pop up everywhere. They've got to have the line as well as the harmony, which is
I have sung in choirs.
Yeah.
And I think that helps, is like having experience singing in choirs and knowing what it's like. I tell people, like, I have I'm not a great chorister because I have a voice that doesn't blend very well, which means that when I was in high school, my teachers would throw me an alto 1 or alto 2 and just say, just sing really loud, Melissa. But the result of that is I pay a lot of attention, especially to the inner lines, and making sure that the altos are, for example, not just singing D, 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 D for 5 pages in a row, that everybody has something interesting to sing, that everybody is engaged. So you can always tell. I don't want to be mean, but you can always tell when a composer is writing for choir and just has no experience ever having sung in a choir.
Yeah, I think you can, sadly. there's whole meme pages now that are based on altos having to sing just like D all the time.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, brilliant. And so you kind of mentioned a bit about Western chord traditions and that kind of thing. Where do you take inspiration from for your music? Where are the kind of roots that you've come from?
Yeah, so I grew up, I went to an all-girls school in Brisbane, Australia, called Somerville House, that has a really good music program. And so I sort of grew up very immersed in Western classical music. I grew up playing the violin. I switched to viola. I was very nerdy about it. I was obsessed with Mozart and Wagner, and these are just sort of this very sort of classical music kid. And then something really weird happened in my late teens. I tell people I had a fight with classical music, and we broke up for a couple of years. I was annoyed at it. I was annoyed at how there's a tendency in classical music, and anybody who's sort of trained understands this. There's a tendency to focus on technical perfection above all else, including sort of the emotional content or the expressive content. It's all technique, technique, technique. And I was really sick of that. So I broke up with classical music, and I became a rock, punk, electronic musician for a few years. I was really into bands like Nine Inch Nails and industrial bands. I played in some really wild electro clash punk bands. I also played in some folk bands for a while. I moonlit in a South American folk band, playing South American folk music at festivals. And I'm really, I came back to classical music, obviously, in my mid-20s when I caught the composition bug, because I sort of feel like it's my first language. But I am so glad that I had those years away from it, and saw other types of music and other ways that music is made, because I don't think classical music is the only way to make music. And there's something, I feel like all of that, all of those influences like make their way into my music in little ways here and there, whether it's choosing a modality, or if I get stuck, sometimes I'll jam something out in a way that I might not have if I had never had those years away. And then, yeah, just something about the irreverence of those other sort of pop forms of music is something that I think classical music could learn from sometimes. I do think we take ourselves too seriously sometimes, and it's really good to sort of just get away from that. So yeah, strangely, at the end of the day, yes, Mozart, Wagner, sure, like the dead Germans, sure. But also, also, also this sort of folk music side of things from a lot of different places, and also people like Trent Reznor and film composers, and jazz. I also, I dabbled in jazz. I wasn't ever very good at it, but I look at a bunch of jazz composers and just the facility, the ease of the melodies that come out, the way they get stuck in your head and they enter your soul. That's something that I aspire to.
Yeah, I think, well, again, you can definitely like hear all of that in your music, especially in Halcyon Days. It was such like a not like a pop song. It was such, you could like tell it was very much like verse chorus kind of thing, and
yeah,
really get the melody stuck in your head afterwards. And then
right.
And then also in Orions, with the harmonies that you use there, where things kind of start clashing, the more like things get angsty, and I feel like that's quite a big part of like rock music in some ways as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. It's because, again, this musical language that we share, it means things, and so the same sorts of clashes that you find in classical, a symphony at the height of the most anxiety ridden moment, it's the same stuff that you find in Western rock music that comes from the same tradition. So yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic, great. So what have you got any good upcoming projects at the minute that you're excited about? You mentioned the opera.
Yeah, that's probably the big one. I'm crunching on the first draft of the piano vocal score for that right now. It's Oberlin Conservatory here in America has commissioned me to write an opera, and it is an archaeology opera because I have this whole other side of my life where I am a citizen archaeologist. It's a wild story. If you want to hear the entire story of how this composer became a citizen archaeologist, you can listen to my podcast, The Bog House, as in slang for toilet from the 18th century, the Bog House, because we found a couple of privies beneath our building filled with artifacts from the 18th century. And I'm writing an opera about a woman who actually died on my property in 1880. She was a sex worker, and I'm 99% sure that she was murdered, actually. But the story, okay, so this is like, sounds like a cliche for an opera, right? Oh, it's a story about a 19th century sex worker who dies, who gets murdered. So are so many operas. But here's the twist. The story is actually about 4 archaeology grad students who are excavating the property and learning her story through the objects that they find. And the moral of the story is that who tells a story says just as much about how that story is told as the actual subject of the story, that all history is about who is telling that history, as much as it is about the history itself, which I think is something that, America certainly is learning very viscerally right now with, thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and thinking about, looking back at our history and the myths that we've constructed about our own history and why those myths were constructed and who constructed those myths. So that's kind of what the opera is about. I'm really excited about it because I feel like it's bringing together these 2 parts of my life, the archaeology and the music, and finally one big project.
Wow, that sounds absolutely amazing. Yeah, and it's such an important thing to think about at the minute, right? Who's actually telling us these narratives of the stories that we hear and how that's influenced our society and everything. So it sounds like such an amazing opera. I'm really looking forward to like seeing it if we can. Or
I hope so. It's called Alice Tierney. Alice Tierney, of course, is the name of the woman who died on my property. There are newspaper reports, and you can sort of learn about that through online research. But yes, please look out for it. And here's hoping that I, manage to churn that out very quickly. So the thing when you're in the middle of composing something, it feels like the most daunting. You have no idea how you're going to get to the double bar line. And then one day it just appears. So I'm still in the thick of it right now.
Okay, yeah. Well, I hope you get through it okay, and it's, I'm really looking forward to seeing it, and I'm sure people can follow you on social media and that kind of thing. And
yes, absolutely. Yeah, if you Google around, melissadunphy.com is my website, and I'm on Twitter as it's the name of my publishing company, Mormolyke, MORMOLYKE. I'm the only blue checked Melissa Dunphy on Twitter. Yes, please get in touch, and I'm very accessible and easy to ask questions if you want to follow up with something.
Great, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for talking to us, and me, and for letting us sing your music, because it was a really fantastic experience, and I think it really it fits so well within the concert program that we did.
Oh my gosh, the honor is mine, honestly. So as a little girl growing up in Australia, I would listen to the radio all the time and hear about St. Martin's, and listen to concerts from the Academy of St. Martin in Fields, and it was always a name that was ingrained in my head. My viola teacher when I was a teenager used to play for the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, and so I always looked up to it as this sort of like, wow, what a cool place. And so when I heard that you were singing my music, I was beside myself, honestly.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can welcome you in person at some point as well, and sing some music to your face.
Please, I would love that.
Yeah, great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for chatting with us, and
thank you.
Bye bye.